Racist cop slaps black woman in court. Seconds later, she takes the judge's seat. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character, Kendra Martin, a determined woman with a sharp mind and unwavering confidence, had always known the value of standing up for herself. She'd worked hard all her life, building her career and maintaining her dignity despite the obstacles she faced daily. But today was different. She had found herself in the midst of a highly charged courtroom, a setting she never thought she'd end up in, and certainly not for a reason like this. As she entered the courtroom, Kendra could feel the weight of the stares from the people around her. She wasn't just there as a participant. She was there to make a stand. Her case was about justice, something that had been denied to her and countless others like her for far too long. The tension in the air was palpable as the judge, a man named David Walker, called the court to order. Kendra, dressed in a sharp black suit, stood tall and composed at the defendant's table. Across from her sat Officer John Miller, a man known for his unapologetic views on law enforcement and the use of force. Today, he was here as a witness in a case that was sure to stir controversy. Kendra's case was simple on the surface, but it was about much more than the specifics of the charges. It was about the systemic issues that had plagued her community for years, issues that, in her mind, had to be addressed if any real change was to occur. As the proceedings began, Officer Miller spoke with an air of arrogance, dismissing Kendra's claims as though they were irrelevant. He didn't believe her. It was clear he thought his position as an officer would give him the upper hand. But Kendra wasn't intimidated. She'd faced people like him before, people who believed they could control the narrative, simply by virtue of their authority. But this time, she wasn't going to let him get away with it. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of the judge's gavel. Miller's voice was cold and dismissive, but Kendra could feel the anger bubbling inside her. She had heard these same dismissive tones from people who looked like him, spoken from positions of power, time and time again. But she wasn't backing down. Her eyes locked onto his, a silent promise in her gaze. She would not let this injustice go unchallenged. The moment stretched on, and as the tension between them grew, something in Kendra shifted. She wasn't just defending herself today. She was defending every person who had been silenced by the system. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling steadily as she prepared herself for what was to come. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, but also a sense of purpose. She was here for more than just this case. She was here for something greater, something that would resonate far beyond the walls of this courtroom. As the judge called for order, Kendra felt her pulse quicken. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that she was here, in the center of the courtroom, everything felt different. Officer John Miller sat just a few feet away, his eyes cold and calculating, as if nothing in this world could faze him. He had seen it all before, and to him, this was just another day. But Kendra wasn't here to let things slide. She was here to make a statement. Her statement wasn't just for herself, but for all the voices that had been silenced over the years. The courtroom was full, yet it felt empty to her. Empty of justice. Empty of truth. Officer Miller's voice broke the silence. He was speaking with such arrogance, dismissing the very reason she was here. The charges against him weren't even on his mind. Instead, he used his platform to undermine her, to make her seem less than she was. But Kendra's resolve was unshaken. She had faced harder battles before, none of which had been fought in a courtroom. And yet, she knew this one was different. She had something that Miller couldn't take away, the truth. The more he spoke, the more Kendra's anger simmered beneath the surface. He kept playing the same tired game that so many others like him had played before, using power to manipulate the system, to control the narrative. But this time, the system was going to change. Kendra's heart beat louder in her chest. She had waited for this moment. She had prepared for this moment, and now that it had arrived, she couldn't just sit back and let him get away with it. As the judge, David Walker, looked on, Kendra straightened her posture. She wasn't just going to defend herself today. No, today she was going to take control. She couldn't just wait for things to happen. She had to make them happen. Taking a deep breath, she stood up from her seat. The room seemed to hold its breath. All eyes were on her now. Kendra stepped forward, her steps steady, her mind focused. She didn't look at Officer Miller, not once. She kept her eyes on the judge. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but firm, "I will not stand here and let this man walk free while people like me continue to suffer." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Kendra didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. It was in the way she spoke, measured, precise, unyielding. "The system has failed me, and it has failed countless others. It's time for that to change." The room was still, not even a whisper. Kendra could feel the power shift. She wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was in control. The judge seemed taken aback, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her words. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension. Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly thrown off by Kendra's unexpected move. For the first time, he seemed uncertain. But Kendra wasn't done. She turned her gaze to the judge, then to the prosecutor and defense attorney. "I'm asking for justice," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I'm not asking for mercy. I'm asking for what's right." And with those words, something changed in the room. The power dynamics that had been so clearly in place moments before began to crumble. Kendra wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, or dismissed. The judge cleared his throat, glancing at the attorneys before looking back at Kendra. The courtroom was tense, with anticipation, but Kendra stood firm. She wasn't going anywhere, not without justice. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Kendra stood tall, every inch of her focused on the moment ahead. She had spoken her truth, but now it was time to see if the people in this room were ready to listen. The silence was almost deafening, each person in the room holding their breath, waiting for the judge to respond. Kendra could feel the weight of the eyes on her, but she remained unshaken. This was her time to stand firm, to make the world take notice. Judge David Walker cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the stillness. He seemed to be considering Kendra's words carefully, the weight of the situation settling upon him. For a brief moment, Kendra wondered if he would back down, if he would allow Officer Miller's influence to sway him. But then the judge did something unexpected. He nodded, slowly, deliberately, as if acknowledging the shift that had just occurred. "Ms. Martin," Judge Walker said, his voice calm but firm, "you have made a compelling argument. This court will take a short recess, and when we return, we will proceed with a review of the charges in light of your statement." The words hung in the air. Kendra's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the verdict she had hoped for, but it was something. It was a chance, a small crack in the door that could lead to a change. As the gavel hit the surface of the bench, the room erupted into a low murmur. People began to shuffle in their seats, some whispering to one another, while others exchanged glances of disbelief. Officer Miller shifted uneasily in his seat, clearly rattled by Kendra's bold move. But Kendra didn't look at him. She kept her focus on the judge. She had no intention of letting this moment slip away. The recess was called, and the room slowly emptied. Kendra stayed in her seat, her mind racing. She knew this was just the beginning. What she had done today was only the first step, but it was a step forward, and that was all she needed. She had made the system see her, hear her. That was more than most people ever got. As she sat there, her thoughts drifted to the countless people who had fought and lost, the ones who had never even had the chance to speak. She thought of the countless others who had faced injustice in silence. And in that moment, she knew she couldn't stop now. She had to keep going. She had to keep fighting for them. When the court reconvened, Kendra was ready. She stood up when her name was called, moving with a calm determination that matched the resolve in her heart. Her eyes never left the judge, and her voice was steady when she spoke. "Your Honor, I stand before you not just for myself, but for all those who have been silenced by a system that does not hear them. I ask for justice, not just in this case, but for every person who has ever been denied it. The courtroom grew quiet again, the energy shifting as Kendra's words settled into the hearts of everyone present. For the first time in what felt like forever, the power in the room seemed to be shifting, and it was clear that Kendra Martin was not going to be ignored. Her fight was just beginning, but she had already made her mark. The courtroom settled into an eerie silence as the judge called the session back to order. Kendra stood at the defendant's table, her back straight, her heart pounding with anticipation. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone knew that the next few moments could change everything. The eyes of the room were once again focused on her. She felt it, the weight of the moment, the gravity of the decision that could shape her future and the future of so many others. But Kendra was not afraid. She was ready. As the judge cleared his throat, the room fell silent once more. "We have heard your words, Ms. Martin," Judge Walker said, his voice firm but respectful. "The court will now proceed with a full review of the charges and the circumstances surrounding this case. This is a significant step forward." Kendra's breath caught in her throat. She had done it. She had made the judge listen. And now, there was a chance, a real chance, that the truth would finally come to light. The next few minutes were a blur as the judge spoke with the attorneys, exchanging words in low tones, occasionally glancing toward Kendra. She remained still, her mind racing. What would happen next? What kind of justice would she receive today? And more importantly, what kind of justice could she help bring to the world? She thought of all the people who had fought for fairness, only to be crushed by the system. She thought of the countless lives affected by the policies and practices that allowed people like Officer Miller to act with impunity. Kendra wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been overlooked, for everyone who had ever been dismissed by a broken system. The judge finally turned to the room, his voice cutting through the quiet. "We will reconvene for closing arguments," he said. "Ms. Martin, you may speak again if you wish." Kendra nodded, her hands trembling slightly. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what she would say. Her mind raced, searching for the words that would encapsulate everything she had fought for. She thought about the injustice, the pain, and the anger. But she also thought about hope. The hope that things could change. The hope that the world could be better. "Your Honor," Kendra began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a fighter. I've seen what happens when people like me are ignored, when the system fails to protect us. But I refuse to be a victim. I refuse to let fear stop me from speaking the truth." Her words were powerful, echoing throughout the courtroom. "I'm asking for justice, not just for myself, but for all the people who have been wronged. I'm asking for a chance to make things right, to hold those who abuse their power accountable." Kendra paused, her eyes sweeping the room. She could feel the weight of her words. "I believe that this court has the power to make a difference. I believe that this moment can mark the beginning of real change." She turned to face Officer Miller, her eyes unwavering. "I will not let you silence me. I will not let you or anyone else get away with this." With those words, Kendra knew that her fight was far from over. She had made her stand. Now, she would wait for the next step in her journey, one that she was determined to see through to the end. The room was still, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The judge nodded solemnly, signaling the end of the session. Kendra sat down, her heart racing, knowing that whatever came next, she had already won something. She had made the system listen, and that, in itself, was a victory. The room was buzzing with whispers as the court adjourned for a break. Kendra sat in her chair, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the wooden table. Her mind raced, replaying every word, every moment, as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had spoken from the heart, but the uncertainty of the situation lingered in the back of her mind. Had she said enough? Would the judge truly take her words to heart? She looked around the room. The prosecutor, the defense attorney, and even Officer Miller were all deep in conversation, their voices low but sharp. Kendra couldn't help but wonder what they were saying. Was she being underestimated? Did they see her as a mere obstacle to be moved aside? Or was her impact beginning to sink in? She had fought so hard to get here, to be heard. But now, it felt like the hardest part was yet to come. The minutes felt like hours, but eventually, the judge's gavel sounded, calling the room back to order. Everyone fell silent. Judge Walker looked down at his papers for a moment, then lifted his gaze, his eyes scanning the room. Kendra sat up straighter, her spine as stiff as the chair she was sitting in. She wasn't going to show weakness, not now. Not after everything she had said. "We are ready to proceed," the judge said, his voice calm, but with an authority that filled the space. "Ms. Martin, your words have been heard. We will now continue with the review of the charges against Officer Miller." Kendra's heart skipped a beat. She had made an impact, but would it be enough to change the course of this trial? Would the system truly hold Officer Miller accountable? The prosecutor stood, presenting a series of documents to the court, outlining the specifics of the case. Kendra's eyes stayed focused on the judge as he nodded along, processing the information. But her thoughts drifted once again, and she found herself thinking about the larger picture. This trial was not just about one officer or even just one incident. It was about a system that had failed too many people for too long. Kendra had heard the stories, seen the headlines, and felt the pain of her community. This trial could be a step toward real change, a small crack in the foundation of the injustice that had been allowed to persist for so long. She couldn't afford to lose sight of that. As the prosecutor finished, Kendra knew it was her turn again. The judge's eyes turned toward her, and for a moment, the weight of the room shifted. All the attention was back on her. She stood and moved to the podium, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I stand before you today not just as a woman seeking justice, but as someone who believes in the power of accountability," Kendra began. "I believe in a system that works for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from. And I believe in a system that holds those in power accountable for their actions." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. The courtroom was still, waiting for what came next. "We cannot allow this to be the end of the story," Kendra continued. "We cannot let one man's actions be swept under the rug because it's easier to ignore the problem than to fix it." She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her, but she wasn't intimidated. Not now. Not when the stakes were so high. Officer Miller has shown us who he is. The question is, will we allow him to continue unchecked, or will we make a stand for what's right? The silence in the room was thick. Kendra's words had pierced through the tension, striking a chord with everyone present. The judge once again nodded. "We will proceed with a full investigation into the matter," he declared. Kendra's heart swelled with hope. This was it. This was the moment that could change everything. She had done what she set out to do. She had forced the system to acknowledge the truth. The gavel came down, and the room began to stir once again. But for Kendra, everything had already shifted. She knew that this was only the beginning. This fight wasn't over yet, but she had already made her mark. She had spoken for those who had no voice, and in doing so, had opened the door to a future where justice could finally be served. Kendra sat back in her chair, her hands gripping the arms of it as the weight of the situation began to settle in. The courtroom had fallen into a hush after the judge's declaration. She had spoken her truth, and now, it seemed, the gears of justice were finally turning. For the first time in what felt like forever, Kendra allowed herself a moment of relief. She had done everything she could. She had faced down the very system that had kept her and so many others oppressed for years. And she had made them listen. Her heart still raced, but it wasn't from fear this time. It was from the power of the moment. The change was in the air. It was slow, but it was coming. Officer Miller had sat silently throughout the last exchange, his face rigid with frustration. Kendra could feel his discomfort, but she didn't care. He was the embodiment of everything she had fought against. The silence in the room stretched, and Kendra knew the decision was imminent. She had no illusions about how hard this fight was going to be. She knew the system wasn't going to just fold under pressure. But today, she had made them feel something. Today, they couldn't ignore her. The judge, after a few moments of thoughtful consideration, finally spoke. We will proceed with the investigation and review all materials presented. This case will not be dismissed. Kendra's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the end, but it was a significant step forward. The shift in the room was palpable, and she felt it deep in her bones. There was hope. There was a chance. And for the first time in a long while, that hope felt real. The judge's gavel struck the surface of the bench again, signaling a break in the session. As the room began to stir, Kendra's attorney leaned over to her, offering a small smile of encouragement. "You did great, Kendra," he whispered. "This is just the beginning." Kendra nodded, though she didn't feel like talking. She wasn't ready to celebrate just yet. She had made it this far, but the real work was still ahead. The room slowly emptied, and Kendra stood, stretching her back. She had been sitting for hours, but now she felt the adrenaline coursing through her again. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. She stepped outside the courtroom, into the hallway, her mind already working through the next steps. The investigation would take time, she knew that. But every day that passed was one more day closer to justice. One more day closer to seeing Officer Miller held accountable for his actions. As Kendra walked down the hallway, her attorney caught up with her, his expression serious. "The next phase won't be easy," he said. "But what you've done today, Kendra, it's powerful. The court's attention is on you now." Kendra nodded, looking straight ahead. "It's not just about me," she replied quietly. "It's about everyone who's ever been silenced. Everyone who's been ignored." Her attorney smiled faintly, clearly impressed with her resolve. "Exactly," he said. "You've given them a reason to listen, and they can't pretend it doesn't matter." Kendra couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel small, for everyone who had ever been overlooked. And as she walked down the corridor, she knew she was ready for whatever came next. The road ahead would be tough, but she was prepared. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Kendra walked out of the courthouse, the bright sunlight hitting her face. The weight of the moment was still fresh, but there was a different kind of feeling in her chest now. It wasn't the anxious tightness she had felt when she first walked into the courtroom. It was a strange blend of relief and determination. The fight wasn't over, but today had been a victory, small perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. Her attorney walked beside her, quietly observing her as they made their way to the parking lot. The streets were busy, the city pulsing with life, but for Kendra, everything felt oddly still. Her mind kept replaying the words she had said in the courtroom, the words she had almost second-guessed at first. But now, those words seemed to echo in her ears, gaining strength with every step she took. The walk to the car felt longer than usual, each step an opportunity for reflection. She could feel the weight of history, the long path that had led her to this point. She thought of the countless individuals who had fought battles like hers and lost, who had fought and still found themselves unheard. She thought of the people in her community who had been silenced, whose voices had been dismissed by a system that seemed determined to ignore their pain. Kendra's grip tightened around the strap of her bag. She wasn't going to let this be another story that faded into the background. She wasn't going to let herself be silenced. The city around her continued its rhythm, but for Kendra, there was a shift now. She wasn't just a woman caught up in a fight for justice anymore. She was a force. As they reached the car, her attorney broke the silence. "You did great today," he said, his tone a mixture of admiration and practicality. "But the real work is about to begin." Kendra nodded, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I know," she replied quietly. "But today was a step." Her attorney gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "A big step," he said, as he opened the car door for her. "Don't underestimate how important that is. You made them listen, and they can't ignore you now." Kendra slipped into the car, her thoughts still focused on the trial, but also on what lay ahead. She wasn't about to let the momentum slip. She had taken a stand today, and now the world had taken notice. As they drove away, she felt something stir deep inside her. It was more than just the victory of the moment. It was the realization that change wasn't something that just happened to people. It was something people fought for, and Kendra was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. The next steps will be harder. She knew that, but she was ready. She was ready to keep pushing, to keep raising her voice until justice was not just a word, but a reality. The trial was far from over, and there would be obstacles ahead, but Kendra was no longer the same woman who had walked into that courtroom. She had found her voice, and with it, she would keep fighting until the world heard it too. Kendra sat quietly in her apartment later that evening, her mind replaying the events of the day. She had said what she needed to say, and the weight of it all was beginning to settle in. The courtroom had felt like a battlefield, and for the first time, Kendra had felt like she wasn't just another casualty of the system. She had been a voice for so many others, for the people who couldn't speak up, for those who had been shut out by the very system that was supposed to protect them. But the question remained, what now? The fight wasn't over. Far from it. The investigation would take time. The legal process would move at its own pace. And there were always those who would try to push the truth aside, dismiss it, or twist it. Kendra knew that, but something had shifted within her. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was taking control. She thought about the future. This case, as important as it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. It wasn't just about Officer Miller. It was about the system as a whole. It was about the countless people who had been silenced, marginalized, and ignored. It was about the fight for equality, for justice, for a society where everyone was truly treated fairly. Kendra closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the weight of that reality sink in. She knew she had made a difference, but she wasn't about to rest on her laurels. She couldn't. There was too much work left to do. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her attorney. Asterisk, the judge's ruling today is significant. We've set a precedent. Keep your head up. This is just the beginning. Asterisk. Kendra smiled to herself. It was exactly the kind of message she needed to hear. It reminded her that, despite everything, she had done something important. Something that couldn't be undone. She responded quickly, typing out a simple reply. Asterisk, thank you. I'm not stopping. Not now, not ever. Asterisk. The words felt empowering as she hit send. Kendra stood up and walked over to the window. She could see the city lights below, the cars moving along the streets, the hum of life going on all around her. The world was moving forward, and so was she. She had started something today, and she wasn't going to let it fizzle out. She wasn't going to let the system win. Kendra wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every person who had been dismissed or ignored, for every person who had ever felt powerless. She thought about the people in her community, the ones who had suffered in silence, the ones who didn't have the strength or the platform to stand up. She was fighting for them, too. As the days passed, Kendra threw herself into the work ahead. She met with activists, organizers, and community leaders, working to amplify the voices of those who had been left behind. She knew that the road ahead would be long, but she was no longer afraid of the fight. She was ready. The truth was powerful, and now, she knew so was she. Kendra stood in front of the mirror, looking at her reflection. The face staring back at her was one she hardly recognized, not because she had changed, but because everything around her had. She was no longer the woman who had hesitated to speak her mind. She was the woman who had taken a stand, who had made her voice heard. And now, the world was paying attention. The case against Officer Miller was moving forward, and though the legal battle was far from over, Kendra had already begun to see the ripple effects of her actions. People were talking. The news outlets were covering the story. Social media was alive with conversations about justice, accountability, and change. But with that attention came pressure. There were days when Kendra felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She thought about the expectations others had of her, the people who saw her as a beacon of hope, a symbol of change. She couldn't afford to let them down, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. She had surrounded herself with a team of advocates, lawyers, and community leaders who believed in the cause as much as she did. Together, they worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. It wasn't just about this case anymore. It was about the movement. It was about fighting for a world where no one, no matter their race, gender, or background, will be treated as less than. And Kendra was going to keep pushing, keep fighting, until she saw that world take shape. One morning, as she was heading out to meet with a group of activists, her phone buzzed with a message from her attorney. Asterisk, the judge has approved. The next phase. The investigation will continue. This is a big step. Asterisk, Kendra smiled. It wasn't a guarantee of victory, but it was progress. Real progress. She texted him back quickly. Asterisk, thank you. We're not stopping now. Asterisk, as she left her apartment, Kendra took a moment to look out over the city. It felt different now. The streets were still bustling, the cars still honked, and the people still moved through their day as if nothing had changed. But she knew something had shifted. She had shifted it. And with that, the world was beginning to change too. She drove to the meeting, her thoughts focused and her resolve clear. The activists she met with were eager, passionate, and ready to take action. They talked about strategies, about reaching more people, about amplifying the voices that had been ignored for so long. Kendra could feel the energy in the room, a shared sense of purpose that gave her strength. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every single person who had been wronged, every single person who had fought for justice but never seen the scales tip in their favor. Kendra was determined to change that. As the day wore on, Kendra felt a renewed sense of focus. The road ahead was still long, but it no longer felt as daunting. The weight of the challenge didn't seem as heavy as it once did. She had a team, she had a cause, and most importantly, she had her voice. The fight was far from over, but Kendra was ready for whatever came next. She had already come so far, and now, with the support of so many others, she was ready to go even further.